The National Populist Newsletter podcast is back after a brief break, and much has happened in the news, including the abrupt collapse of Afghanistan. The United States war in Afghanistan lasted 20 years, cost us approximately $2 trillion, and the lives of more than 2,400 service members. The total reported death toll amounts to over 241,000 people, and the Taliban gained control of the country in the span of a few weeks after Joe Biden botched our withdrawal. What does this catastrophic exit mean for the state of our country and trends of our politics? I'm Anthony Leonardi, and once again, welcome back to the National Populist Newsletter podcast. So today I'm with the leader of the National Populist Movement himself, Ryan Girdusky. As many of our listeners know, Ryan is the author of the book They're Not Listening: How the Elites Created the Nationalist Populist Revolution, the founder of the 1776 Project PAC, and a widely respected commentator and political consultant. Ryan, it's good to talk to
Thanks for bringing me on my podcast, newsletter
you.
podcast.
So, there's a lot to discuss about this Afghanistan story. And just to give some context, I think, to people who are already aware going into this, we know Biden actually agreed with President Trump about ending the war in Afghanistan. And we know that it was a widely popular view among the American people writ large. I think before the withdrawal of Afghanistan occurred, it was the latest polling from the Chicago Council of Global Affairs had the approval rating at 70%, but that number has plummeted to about 49%, according to the most recent Politico Morning Consult poll as of August 16th. That same poll said that 57% of Americans thought the withdrawal from Afghanistan was botched by the Biden administration. But his basic strategy has just been to defend the principle of withdrawing from Afghanistan and assert that the Taliban's rise in the country was just inevitable and that Trump's May 1st deadline was to blame for putting pressure on him. Republicans are just using this to say whatever they want. But what do you think is the correct criticism of Biden here?
Well, I think Biden deserves the credit for actually getting out. I've been feuding with a lot of people on multiple fronts because I think that, yes, he was right to get out, and yes, he should get the credit for getting out and ripping off the band aid. However, the process in which he left was so disastrous. It and I've said this to Kurt Mills on Twitter, and Kurt doesn't understand it, and this is the truth. It will make people believe that um, anytime you talk about withdrawing from a war zone, it's always in a disastrous, position. So leaving the military before you took the civilians out, before you destroyed sensitive information, before
Right.
you destroyed sensitive military equipment, sensitive technology, giving up the Air Force bases that actually were easy to defend, that we could control, instead of having, and then reducing us down to just a Kazi airport uh, in Kabul. Um, these were, I mean, it was disaster after disaster after disaster. The idea that the Afghan army just simply wouldn't fight for themselves is kind of the narrative going out there, but it's not exactly the truth. There were many Afghan fighters who fought the Taliban throughout the last 20 years, and while the Taliban were advancing, they were just retreating because their ranks were breaking and their generals were folding. Um, but that being said, they did get back together. There is a resistance movement against the Taliban. The vice president of Afghanistan is still fighting, and he hasn't fled the country. Um,
Mhm.
and a big part of that was that we built the Taliban and Air Force, and then Biden denied contractors the ability to work with the Afghans to um, to use their Air Force, and they built a military that was reflective of the U.S. military, in the sense that the Air Force does a lot of the heavy lifting, and they couldn't use the Air Force because they didn't have contractors. So there was a
Right.
series of mistakes that I think led to the situation, and I think that at this point now, our main concern has to be first questioning what weapons were left and what technology was left in Afghanistan. and how many
Right.
Americans are left there. And they keep saying we're bringing home 13. We brought 13,000 people out of Afghanistan. Well, only a few hundred of them were Americans. So a lot of Afghanistan people have left. Afghan people have left, but that 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 doesn't interest me. I mean, I care far more about the Americans who are just stuck there.
Right. We're stranded.
There.
The and what's interesting is that it when you're this kind of conversation brings up the whole issue of national security to some extent because that's what this is connected to. And it is kind of reflective to me at the least of the either willingness or insufficiency of the current state, the government, to actually address the national security issues of our time. Meaning that they're all good and fine and efficient at containing right wing terrorism, at stopping Trump supporters, at charging the mostly peaceful protesters at the on January 6th and whatnot. But they're very specific in intent to go after those people. But then when it comes to things of serious consequence, when you're talking about Afghanistan, when you're talking about other more pressing issues of national security, it points to an ineptitude. And it's deeply kind of concerning. We still have Americans that, like you said, that are over there. And the fact that Biden is thus far unwilling to admit that a correct path forward in withdrawal meant that those Americans could be home safely when they pulled out.
Well, what the French and the British are doing are they're going into, and they obviously have a lot less people than we have, the 10 or 11,000, but they're going in and they're scooping up their people individually. I mean, I think we did a trip yesterday to take out 169 Americans and bring them to the Kabul airport. But before that, we had not done any reconnaissance to try to take care of and find these Americans.
Yeah.
And there's thousands of them in this godforsaken country. And we have this August 31st deadline that was imposed by the Taliban. Um, as in 10 days of this recording, we have to be completely out of the country, allegedly. Americans are being beaten and their passports are being
Mm,
taken, according to multiple news reports. And the bigger, the bigger problem from our perspective is also that um, all these other countries are promising to take in Afghans as long as they can resettle them into America.
right.
So
So,
Colombia has done that. A few other Middle Eastern countries are saying we're going to resettle them into America later on. So we have no idea which refugees we're getting or where they're getting them. England is even doing a more insane thing where England has sat there and said that they are now going to take refugees without documentation, tens of thousands of them.
really,
The UK has been a hot target of terrorist activity for the last 20 years.
you'd think their home secretary would protest that a little bit,
Preeti
given what
Patel,
she's.
no, Preeti Patel is useless.
Oh, really?
She's a useless home secretary, and and look, I mean, the Bojo's government is been problematic for quite some time, and it's only going to get worse from here on out.
Yeah, and this is sort of the other side of this story that I wanted to talk to you about because you've seen a bipartisan coalition about how the United States should respond using its immigration system. There was a report from Reuters this week that said the Biden administration is trying to get foreign countries to admit Afghans who worked as translators and worked for the United States government in other capacities. And Biden said in a press conference this week that he would like U.S. allies to get to the airport in Kabul for evacuation. As has like Republicans like Senator Joni Ernst have supported the special immigrant visa to bring thousands of Afghans here. So, what's your take on a solution like this? Is presumably you would think it's bad policy.
No, I mean, here's what I don't understand is, there's all these women and children who need to get out of Afghanistan, and there's hundreds of thousands of them, and I don't blame them for wanting to get out of Afghanistan. But the problem is the State Department sent out, thousands and thousands of emails with these special passes. And what happened was people in Afghanistan started printing them out by the dozens and paying people, and people were paying to get them. So there's so much fraudulent paperwork now out there because of the way that this was handled. I say this, unless they were directly involved with the US military, and I'm talking more than just an interpreter, someone who was deeply involved, they should not get any visa to the United States. We liberated Iraq twice. We liberated them from Saddam and we liberated them from ISIS. Um, Iraq has tons of land. They are Arabic. Move them to Iraq. Iraq. I mean, they shouldn't have us. They shouldn't be able to sit there and have a say. We have tons of military bases in Iraq as well. They can live. They can make a city around a military base, so if they wanted to, in Iraq for them. There's no reason that that's not a possibility. If there's 100,000 or 200,000 Afghans who need to leave, go send them to Iraq.
It's interesting. Um, and there's also the political aspect too, in that there are Republicans like Texas Representative Dan Crenshaw who are very adamant and explicit about their criticism of the anti-endless war voices among what among the Trump supporters, and that this move basically opens us up not to another 9/11 attack, not because the withdrawal was botched,
He's
but
a
because
moron.
it was done it was done at all.
Dan Crenshaw,
Um,
I mean, this guy has shit for brains. There's no, I mean, like, there's no doubt about it whatsoever. He's not working with a full set. Yeah, the idea that we have to fight them over there so we don't fight them over here is a 2003 talking point that wasn't true then. It's not true now. They know what planes are. They know how to get on top of a plane, and they know when it comes to the United States of America. They did that with the San Bernardino shooting. They did that with the Boston bombing. They did that with um, numerous other attacks. There's been, I think, 27 Islamic terrorist attacks in the United States in the last since 9/11. Um, and a majority of them have been by foreign-born people. We've imported terrorism time and time and time again. Um, I think it's like 27 failed and successful terrorist attacks, and they're mostly by foreigners, by people
mm,
who come to this country. They know how to get there to do this. It's a ridiculous statement. Um, you should be more concerned about not the grand terrorist attack of another 9/11, which would be horrific, but you should be more concerned about the minor attacks that people have to go through from importing so many people from the Afghan world. I mean, Afghans have become are
right.
horrible refugees in Europe. They have enormous crime waves, enormous situations with rape and petty theft and burglaries uh, and robberies. It's a terrible. I mean, they're not an easy group to asylum, and that's why Germany. I mean, even Merkel announced that she's still going to sit there and deport Afghan refugees back to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan because that's how bad the refugees are.
Yeah.
It's how many laws they're breaking. It's how horrible they are to women. Western women, not women studying gender studies at the Kabul University. So I think that is really what they're missing, and it's this constant, incessant need by these people to sit there and worry about the domestic consequences of people in Afghanistan and the global consequences of America's foreign policy and America staying in the world, but never the domestic concerns of American civilians and how they might deal with things.
Yeah, I think this kind of boils down just to a fundamental disagreement where, people like Crenshaw would just say, we just need to continually have a presence there. That's necessary to stop terrorism. And I think most, I think most Americans, at least before the Biden withdrawal, would say, no, we just do not agree that that is necessary to protect the homeland. And I think that even was indicative of Trump's 2016 foreign policy, because at the time we had ISIS, and at the time that was a very a top issue for a lot of different people, and he had a very clear mission when he was pursuing a more aggressive, hands on approach to just destroying ISIS, which he did. His foreign policy is just like this. We're going to destroy you. He did do that. He worked cooperatively with leaders in Syria and Afghanistan to just destroy them to that end. And I think though that that's just like there is the end that was accomplished, and now why are we there? So I think that just boils down to a fundamental disagreement that cannot be reconciled. But I'm wondering if you think that this whole thing is going to affect the political landscape going forward. Do you think that the issue of anti-endless war might become more unpopular because of Biden's actions? And
I think if an American gets kidnapped by the Taliban, I mean, one American is already kidnapped by the Taliban. Frederick, I think his name is Marsh, is his name, I believe. He is a prisoner of the Taliban. But if the 31st deadline comes and goes, and an American later on is kidnapped or killed by the Taliban, I think that it's going to be devastating to Joe Biden. And I think it's the ramifications. And I think that if this is their first exit from a war zone, they don't view it with the celebratory march, outside of a capital, leaving it, to reconcile how much freedom they have. It is the memory of them being captured, sorry, it's the memory of people sitting there and shooting in the streets, marauding, Americans being targeted and attacked. Sorry, that was my dog growling. uh, I think that I think it's going to be really, really problematic, and I think it's problematic for Joe Biden simply because he's getting caught lying about the situation on the ground. And let's see how long it takes for him to bring Americans home. I think that that's going to be the biggest question: is how long are Americans going to it's going to take for Americans to actually come home? Because right now, for Joe Biden's great exit from Afghanistan, we have more troops there now than we did before, and we still have almost 10,000 civilians stuck. So
yeah.
wait and see, I guess, when we're actually coming home, because as of right now, we're still not home. And it's just even more problematic how this happened.
What do you reasonably anticipate that the GOP, how the GOP would respond to this? Do you think that there is like a greater likelihood that they stick to sort of the Trump message about and the national populist sort of approach to being anti-endless war, focusing on America's interest, or do you think that it's more likely that they'll take more of a Dick Cheney stance on intervention? And
Politics will always result in people trying to own the people who they're opposing. So they will take extremely. I mean, it's like when Democrats in Arizona attacked Blake Masters for saying that they wanted a one family income and saying that that was
right.
patriarchal. Incredibly stupid comment, but you're always looking to own that. So I assume that Republicans are going to sit there and say leaving was a mistake because that's the natural remark, and it's a bad one though. I think it's going to pull very badly. Um, I think the smart ones are going to have the comment of how we left, and I think Tom Cotton's criticisms right now are probably the most dead on because he's been saying even if you wanted to leave and if you were supportive of leaving behind drones, facial recognition technology, intelligence, Humvees, and
Yeah.
10,000 Americans and the Air Force is not the way to leave.
Yeah, well, I think that Biden kept saying that it was just a matter of time, which is like obviously true. Anything is a matter of time since we live in time. But he, you know, do you think that the proper withdrawal would have been that the machinery, technology, and weapons that we gave the Afghans, um, they wouldn't be in the hands of the Taliban had they not fallen so abruptly? Um,
The proper response would have been this: keep the Air Force with their air campaigns to keep the Taliban at bay, get rid of all the sensitive information, all the high top quality intelligence, keep some military in the embassy in Kabul, and bring all of the civilians outside of Kabul in the immediate the immediate area of Kabul out, and then once the rest of the country is out, you can cease the military campaigns as the Taliban would have advanced, because they would have. Although if you would allow the contractors to work with the Afghan Air Force, they may have been held up for longer. But let the Afghan military do their thing. As they came to Kabul, as they got close to Kabul, whether it be a longer time or a shorter time, then you just pack up the embassy. But everyone else would have been gone already. You would have had the visa systems already gone for the people immediately working with us. And then we
Right.
could have left 1, 2, 3, and we wouldn't have had to worry about everything. We could have moved most of the weaponry out. We could have sat there and destroyed any of the sensitive information. But you don't move the military first and then leave the civilians there. The civilians go first, then the military.
Yeah. So I wonder, what do you think the message of National Populist should be, of about this going into 2022,
Well,
2024?
that we have to remember that nation building is a failed idea, that we should have never been doing it to begin with. Um, and I think
Right.
that going into the future, any type of military intervention has to be has to really pass the smell test of a just war policy that does not involve nation building, and um, and it has to have a very clearly defined role of success. And that does, and if it's making something, turning Afghanistan into Delaware, that's not a clearly defined view of success. Um, so I think that's the main goal as far as war goes. And now the bigger question is going to be, how do we get our troops home? How do we find out what the Taliban have, and figure out the refugee situation. I don't think, by the way, the Taliban are going to have the easiest time controlling Afghanistan the way that they think they did. I think that young people who have never been under Afghan control in living memory are not going to take it sitting down like the way their parents did.
Mm.
Um, I think the Zoomers and the geriatric millennials are going to have a much more difficult time adjusting to it. And there's the rebels. I mean, there is a rebellion area in Afghanistan that's going to fight back
Right.
against the
Right.
Taliban. So I think that it's not exact. All the dies have not been cast yet. I think that our main focus has to be making sure that whatever refugees we take in are few, and they are the most likely to have worked with us directly, and then lastly, get all our Americans home.
Yeah. It's using our foreign policy as a function of pragmatism, essentially. It's not using the military, not using foreign policy as the fulfillment of ideology. And at the end of the day, I think that
That's
Americans are,
Wilsonian.
yeah, I think that exactly. I think that Americans are more on board with the pragmatic approach that you're laying out,
Yeah.
because they don't want to see any more of their nation's daughters and sons to be sent out involved in.
85% of everyone who died in Afghanistan was a white American from red states and red counties of red states. That's the people who
Hmm.
paid the price of that war. Red state America. And during the last 20 years, what also happened to red state America? We underwent massive demographic transformations of mass immigration. We went through an opioid epidemic. They spent trillions of dollars over there, while their own life expectancies declined, while their factories continued to move abroad. The people who were asked to pay the ultimate sacrifice in America, to fight over there for America, their parents and their relatives living in those same counties underwent the worst parts of globalism. I think that's the ultimate lesson: is that you fight a great. I think Pat Buchanan told me this one time. A nation becomes a great nation. A country becomes a great nation by winning a war, but it stays a great
Hmm.
nation by avoiding a second war. And I think
Right.
that that's the what I think the ultimate lesson the last 20 years has been this huge sacrifice paid on by such a small fragment of the population, their relatives and friends and family that they were fighting and dying for, paid another big sacrifice to the god of globalism and the god of neoliberalism at home. And it was this dual sacrifice that no one won from.
Well said. Pat Buchanan said that
Yeah.
about the. That's pretty sharp. I like that. So this is a separate topic, but I'd be remiss if I didn't take the time to mention the 1776 Project PAC, your endeavor to help school board candidates who run on platforms that abolish critical race theory, the 1619 Project, and structure a patriotic school curriculum win. Do you have any updates for readers of the newsletter?
Yeah, our endorsements are coming out next week, first week of September. So yeah, and I think that's next week. We have 55 endorsements. We'll be announcing them next week, and the only thing we're doing right now that I think our last hurdle, we have one hurdle left, and it's just trying to get the compliance together for all of the state laws, because every state law is going to have a different compliance law when it comes to how a federal PAC can spend, whether we have to start a state PAC or whether we can spend directly into those elections. But our endorsements are definitely coming out soon, and then hopefully by the end of the month, by the end of September, we will be able to start spending on behalf of the candidates. That's what I'm hoping for, anyway. The compliance is the last hurdle we have, but the endorsements are ready. We're ready to go.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Ryan, for coming on the podcast, your podcast,
Yeah.
uh, and providing
Thank you
clarity.
for Anthony. Thank you for doing it. I think this is really good, and I think that this will add a lot to subscribers.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, for
I
sure.
I think that listeners like to or readers like to be able to listen to people explain things in deeper context, and this podcast I think is a great function for that, to be able to understand intonations, to be able to engage just a little bit more, um, and that's why it can be a great thing. So,
Yeah.
with that, I encourage everyone to subscribe to the National Populist Newsletter and to follow all of Ryan's latest projects, including the aforementioned 1776 Project Pack, because it all starts in places like here. Until next time, the National Populist Newsletter podcast. I'm Anthony Leonardi, and thank you for listening.